Hey people, how you doing? We are live. Welcome to the Sports Therapy Association podcast, episode 220. My name is Matt Phillips, creator of RunChatLive.com, and as always, this episode is being recorded live on the Sports Therapy Association YouTube channel and Sports Therapy Association Facebook page. So here we are. We've reached the last episode before Therapy Expo 2024. There won't be a live episode recording next Tuesday because we'll be getting on our trains and mopeds and vans and transits and all that sort of stuff to head up to the Birmingham NEC in time to start 2 days of fantastic education, CPD and networking on November the 27th and 28th for Therapy Expo. Obviously, the STA Theatre will be there live and functioning across the 2 days, bringing you some amazing, fantastic speakers, a chance to listen, learn, interact, and hang out with fellow therapists. So really looking forward to that. Before I bring up tonight's guest, who is, I'm glad to say, one of the speakers. I haven't had a chance to bring you all the speakers. I wish I had, but time doesn't give that luxury. But I am extra thrilled to be able to bring you for the second time, because the first time didn't quite work because there's some technical difficulties our end, but I'm really thrilled to be able to bring you very shortly Tim Stevenson, shoulder strength and conditioning specialist and co-founder of Dynamic Shoulders. But before I do that, I must give a warm thank you to last week's guest, the wonderful James Earls, who was with us in episode 219, discussing the shortcomings of the traditional approach to learning anatomy. And indeed, James Earls will be at Therapy Expo next week on day 1:45 in the STA Therapy Update Theatre, giving a Q&A session entitled Anatomy for Soft Tissue Therapists, What Should I Be Learning? He's also going to be in the Hands-On Hub, also in Theatre B, all of which you can hear about in last week's episode. So check that out. It's available on all popular podcast apps and YouTube, and that would be episode 219. Right then, people are joining us live. If you listen to podcasts, then we do record this live. So people are able to come and leave their questions on the screen and share any comments. For example, Nikki Mansfield has said, evening all, Cambridge is into house. So down with the kids is our Nikki. Thank you, Nikki, for joining us. Looking for some very tricky questions. Okay, Nikki, put your hat on. Give Tim some good, awkward questions, please, for tonight. Also, Lindsay Penn says, evening, everybody. Good to see you, Lindsay. Thanks for joining us. And Sir Glenn Murphy, MBE, is in here as well. So, evening, folks. Like I say, listen to the podcast. Fancy joining us live? Then just not next week, but from thenceforth onwards, normally on a Tuesday at 8 o'clock. Right. So we do come, like I've said, to the last episode before Therapy Expo, entitled Dynamic Shoulder Reconditioning. Like I say, very shortly, I'm going to bring up Tim Stevenson, shoulder strength and conditioning specialist and co-founder of Dynamic Shoulders. Tim himself is going to be speaking at Therapy Expo next week, including a shoulder injuries Q&A session in the STA Theatre on day 1, which is November the 27th, Wednesday, at 4:25 p.m. So, without further ado, let's bring up my guest for this evening. Fingers are all crossed. I'm not even going to think about what happened a few weeks ago. It's just not going to happen again. Let's bring him up. Tim Stevenson of dynamicshoulders.com. So tempting fate, aren't I? What a nightmare. Can I just publicly apologise again to you, Tim? So sorry.
You don't need to.
Oh, I do.
It was a test run, but I have come in a more relaxed environment this week. Just sitting down.
Oh, no, you're so good. You're so good to me. You're so nice. You definitely. Hey, I would gladly train with you because I feel safe in your hands. Definitely.
That's good.
Right now, I really appreciate it. I'm really looking forward to hearing all about shoulders is what I put on the advert, because anybody looking at you at the moment live will realize that you are shoulders. And also anybody who follows you on Instagram, a wealth of information. And I think probably the best thing to do is to start out how you became a specialist in looking after shoulders.
Right from the beginning.
Well,
start. A short summary.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's two strands here, really, personal and professional. So let's start with the personal one because it sort of dovetails a little bit into what I'm going to do at Therapy Expo next week. I first dislocated my shoulder when I was about 19 years old, playing rugby at university. That was the first of many repeated instances of dislocation or instability. Ended up having a surgery, continued playing again afterwards. Took a break while I lived abroad for a few years, came back, dislocated my shoulder again, had a second surgery, did the rehab. Rehab put me back to a place. And then finally, the last time I dislocated my shoulder, I was on my snowboard post-second surgery. And at that point, I was like, I'm done. The rehab isn't working to get me back as a sort of life that I want to live, the person that I am, the things that I get enjoyment out of. The rehab that I've been prescribed hadn't worked to a level that I needed it to. So that was a story which kind of underpins the personal journey. The professional journey is 16 years in professional strength and conditioning full time. I spent the most amount of my career in elite Paralympic sport, which is where we originally connected at the London 2012 Games after Richard Whitehead had just conquered the 200 meter field. I've led the swimming program from 2016 through to 2021. Was at the Games with British Para Swimming and Paralympics GB in 2016. I've just had one individual athlete who competed a wheelchair racer at Paris. Started the School of Calisthenics in around 2013 after we took a real deep dive into bodyweight training in a progressive approach, myself and Jacko, my partner in that business, which was my thought experiment originally of, if I can learn to handstand, that will give me some confidence that my shoulders are stable. This was part of my experiment to see if I could find a better way to recondition my shoulders than what I'd been prescribed previously. So having done a lot of work in swimming, the overhead sport, the shoulders that we'd seen, my personal journey, what we'd learned through calisthenics, which was that this stuff is pretty good for the shoulder, we sat down and said, look, there's a whole piece of work here which is potentially going to change the way that people can rehabilitate or recondition a shoulder if they are an athletic type fitness enthusiast, athletic person, performance minded. They want to get after it. They want to be an active life. And they want to do things. And they might have come from that previous background of having had shoulder injuries in the past. What do those people need? And Dynamic Shoulders was effectively born out of that whole amalgamation of experiences. And that was 3 years ago. So for the last 3 years, we've done nothing but recondition people with shoulders that have had a little bit of a tough time, or for whatever reason they've found themselves in a place with shoulder pain or issues which is stopping them from doing the things that they want to be able to do.
Mm. Great. Let's unpack that a little bit. A massive, illustrious story. And it's interesting. Let's start at the beginning. It's amazing how many guests do come with a story of unsuccessful rehab. Yourself, I'm thinking Dr. Claire Minshall, for example, had the same sort of thing with back injuries. And it's interesting that spurs you on to think, well, even Jacko himself. You mentioned Jacko as well, who we had in episode 160 with his breath work for head trauma. That came out of, as I'm sure you know better than everybody, a lack of rehab and basically being told to just go home, sit in the dark, and that's as much as people can do. It was like, well, hold on, surely not. So you guys have had to do your own research and thought this isn't working. So it's interesting. Do you think it makes you a better practitioner to have suffered that, and it makes you realize what it's like for some of your kind of clients, what they're going through?
Yeah, it's an ironic thing, isn't it? I remember when I was staring down the barrel of the second surgery, and that was where I had to call time on playing rugby, because at that point I was like, I'm not doing the rehab again. If anybody's listening to this who's had a shoulder surgery, they'll know that it is brutal. If you're an active person, the function that you lose post shoulder surgery is really tough, because it takes ages and you can't do any of the things that you want to be able to do. It's even difficult to train legs in the gym because you can't back squat or front squat or anything. So it certainly gives you a context of what it's like psychologically to go through that process with people. With an active population, an athletic population, they just want to be back in the gym. They want to train. They want to do their sport. There's definitely like a real issue about the urgency that comes with it. So does it make you a better practitioner? You can still put people back together and get people great outcomes having not dislocated a shoulder. I think it gives me a much greater level of empathy with what people are experiencing. I know what it's like when somebody says to a therapist, I don't trust my shoulder, I don't have confidence in my shoulder. I think that's quite difficult to really understand what that means unless you've been in a situation where, like, I think I'm going to dislocate my shoulder if I don't move. So it's definitely not essential, but it gives you an extra layer that you can potentially speak to with clients. And there's a lot of people who we've worked with who have come to us because they say, well, you know what it's like and you've done it. that doesn't mean that everybody who should go out and dislocate a shoulder just to see what it's like.
No, not at all. We're not recommended that. Just Gary Benson, the founder of the STA, is in the house. We're not saying that, Gary. Just in case. No, but it's very interesting. You don't need to have suffered what a person suffers to show empathy. It's more a case of listening and letting them speak and showing that you're there to support them. But I think looking after runners, for example, on the occasions where I remember once I had a pain suddenly. And I thought, right, that's it. It's going to be a stress fracture, second metatarsal or something. I was so sure of it. And I was limping around and thinking, oh, it's bound to happen eventually, straight away. And this is somebody who has spent a good many years talking to other patients about the dangers of catastrophizing and kind of worrying about the worst thing. Fortunately, I was in a multidisciplinary clinic and went to a podiatrist to have a little look. Yeah, it was just a corn. I just took it out. It was fine, But I always remember that story because even though I live and breathe this kind of psychosocial factors and don't know, it's not. I was straight away thinking the worst, and I think that's sometimes useful when we do get injured to realize how scary it can be for patients. However big and strong and happy you are, we do kind of worry about the worst, and also taking the sport away from us. I mean, that's like it's been described as like. Grieving, isn't it, when suddenly you can't do your activity again? So I think it's useful for us to get injured.
I 100% agree. One of the things I'll talk about next week is around identity. And when we're dealing with athletic people, when I had to stop not playing rugby anymore, I played rugby since I was 9-10 years old, and at that time I'm like mid-20s, or late 20s. That's a significant part of my life which has been dedicated to being a rugby player. And all of a sudden I remember sit there and I'd be like, it was painful to be like, I'm not a rugby player anymore. I actually don't know who I am now. I had to go on this whole journey of exploring, like, what am I going to do with my weekends now? Because I'm not playing the sport that I grew up, that I still love now. It is, and that's the thing. I think it's recognizing that with people that it's tough. And again, this is exactly the sort of stuff I'm going to talk about next week as to how we can actually potentially manipulate and change the environment in terms of how we deliver shoulder reconditioning so that we can get better results for people by some relatively simple, straightforward things, which is just a different way of thinking about it and recognizing who is the person who's standing in front of you.
Let's bring that up because I'm conscious now, anyone who's listening so far thinking, oh, Therapy Expo. If you are going to Therapy Expo, then this is going to be for you. If you're not going to Therapy Expo, there's still time probably to get a ticket somehow and sort it out. I don't want to increase the whole fear of missing out sort of thing. But if you haven't got it now, then I'm sorry. I empathize. But for all of this, you are coming along, then let's chuck up on the screen now some information on when you could get to see Tim Stevenson. So on day one, which is the 27th, 1:20 p.m. in Theatre B, like Tim just mentioned, shoulder reconditioning, how to stack the deck and get game-changing results. So that's on day one. And then later on in the afternoon at 4:25, which is how the STA Theatre is going to be operating a lot these days, Tim is going to join us for a Q&A session on shoulder injuries, which will give you a chance, if you did go to the Theatre B at 1:20, to get closer to Tim and be able to ask some more kind of questions on the same sort of level rather than in the theatres where you're kind of great information, but you can't really get close and get those personal questions. So that'll be at 4:25 in the STA Therapy Update Theatre. And obviously we've got a speaker lounge as well this year, which will be working well next to the STA stand, where speakers, if they've got time, are encouraged to kind of hang around a little bit after or before, and again just offer advice and chat with delegates who are coming in. So very excited about that. All these details will be on the show notes as always. I want to let's hide that for a sec. Nikki's just reminded me here. So Nikki Mansfield, who is going to be at Therapy Expo in a week, she said, oh yeah, he's Jacko's calisthenics buddy. I thought I recognized the face and the shoulders. You must get so much of that. I bet you'd never get tired of it. But
always Jacko's buddy as well. It's never like, yeah, Jacko's his buddy. It's actually Tim and Jacko, just for the record.
Oh, listen to that. Nikki, what have you done here? You put a compliment wrapped up in a kind of a Nikki, I don't know how you're going to come back with that. Yeah, but anyway, but the calisthenics things I'm really interested in. Let's have a look at you and your kind of sidekick Jacko in this photo here.
Sidekick,
there you go, sidekick Jacko. So we're talking, in case you're wondering who this Jacko character is, then like I said, it's really worth checking out. I mean, these two together are a formidable force, but David Jacko Jackson was a guest in episode 160 talking about breathwork for head trauma. And he mentioned as well the whole calisthenics journey and how his goal in life after having to give up rugby and really traumatic time for him was to be able to do this human flag. And you can't see this on the podcast, obviously, but here we have a wonderful photo of a rather large guy in the middle with yourself and 𝐒𝐸𝐾 doing human flags on this guy, just holding onto his ankles and his forearms. What is it about?
Lamont, Scottish
how
rugby
different?
player.
Oh yeah, you said yeah. He makes you two look slightly small, which
he's
is
a big
incredible
man.
because you and Jacko are big guys. But I mean, okay, for people who are looking at this photo, I recommend you go to YouTube and have a little look at it. Is that as impossible as it looks, or presumably not? To be able to do that, what sort of training are you looking at?
Jacko used to tell me off because in workshops I'd say it's relatively easy, and it is, in the sense of the skill component of it is not that difficult to do. There's a high level of let's say neural connection required, just learning how to create the force. But essentially in a human flag, the bottom arm pushes into the object, which in this case is Sean's tibia, and then the top arm is the pulling arm. So normally we do it straight arm. So it's like, imagine it on the top arm, it's a single arm active hang. So you're really pulling hard into that retraction, downward rotation from the scapula effectively. You're connecting that tension down the lateral obliques and into the hip to kind of hold that top support position, and you're pushing out from the bottom hand. So it's just generally, it's a matter of being very specific with the training. There are some drills and progressions you can do to ease the transition from beginning to the full movement pattern, but it's I'd say it's not the most difficult calisthenics move to learn. It just requires some consistency of effort. And
what is it? Dickie's just come back here with let's just check how she did. Sorry, Tim, no offense intended. I just met Jacko first. She met Jacko first. There you go. Fair enough.
I was only playing.
And can you go, because again, people probably haven't got a very good idea about calisthenics, or they think it's for the elites, or they see photos like this and think, well, that's not going to help me. What is it about calisthenics which I suppose in your view gives us a better path to follow for strengthening shoulders and rehabbing shoulders as opposed to traditional methods?
Yeah, I mean, people should probably bear in mind listening to this around the shoulder which I dislocated and had the surgeries on is my left shoulder. So that's actually the one in the most cases, if I'm doing a human flag, would be the one which I put on the bottom. That's the arm which I actually ironically feel more confident in. The thing that I think was valuable in calisthenics and what it taught me from a shoulder reconditioning perspective is we are essentially taking what we know from a rehabilitation perspective, which is evidence in the literature around when we're trying to rehabilitate the shoulder. Some of the key things we're looking towards, particularly around shoulder instability, will be to restore range of motion, improve neuromuscular control, and integrate the kinetic chain. So ground-based movements, closed chain patterns, that's where we'd always start with the rehab journey. What calisthenics does, if you think about what we're doing, is we're hand balancing, we're hanging on bars, we are using gymnastics rings. It's a pretty much a closed chain dominant environment in the most part. So the way that I looked at it and was like, well, all we're doing is taking the principles that we know from an early rehabilitation perspective, and we're scaling them under greater intensities. So all the good things that happen in early stage, we can now move into more of a strength and conditioning type conversation to continue to move people on that upward trajectory of building shoulders, which they can trust essentially and do more with. So it was that calisthenics journey which sparked in my mind going, how do we actually kind of package this up or use this for an audience of people that aren't interested in going down a calisthenics route because it's a pretty kind of dedicated way of training, but would benefit from doing more hanging patterns, some more ground-based movement, closed chain progressions, trying some hand balancing things, and then how do we put that into a bigger conversation that would fit in with barbells, dumbbells, kettlebells, band work, mobility practices, whatever that might be. So it was effectively looking at how all the tools that we've got available and just building out that toolbox for things which were particularly effective for the shoulder.
Fantastic. Very interesting. You mentioned as well a lot of work that you've done with para athletes and Paralympic gold medalists. What about, I'm interested, what's some of the experience you've gained of doing that, which have helped you in terms of working with able-bodied athletes or anybody in terms of looking after their shoulders? What are some of the takeaways you've gained from that experience?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one because it's something I've actually been reflecting on for quite a few years. when I was deep into Paralympic sport and I was like, all I was doing, and it was my passion, I still is, I loved it. It was a ground to go and test yourself, learn and to think outside of the box and to be really challenged. I would recommend any practitioner goes and spends time in a Paralympic or working with athletes with an impairment of some whatever opportunity you can get, because it will completely change your perspective on how you see things, but then also how you can actually then deliver innovative and dynamic strategies for people. The thing that I love the most about it was it solving complex problems. There's so much within there about how you need to understand how you can use an environment. So an example of that would be when the first day on my consultancy contract with British Para Swimming, it was on pretty much the 1st of January 2016. I come in to take over the strength and conditioning program into the games, which is actually the worst time to take on a program because you are 9 months out of the Paralympic Games. And so you've done none of the preparation work and you're now carrying all of the responsibility to make sure that people arrive physically in a good place, ready to compete. So we arrive in Thailand on training camp. It's amazing. We've got 12 athletes, I think it was, there lined up on a pool deck. It's day number 2 or in the afternoon, the first day, I think. And the head coach says to me, right, come on, let's get them prepped and get them warmed up. And then him and the assistant coach just went and sat by the side of where I was doing the warm-up area. And they'd never seen me coach before because I'd been recruited by the performance director. So now I've got one athlete with intellectual impairment. I've got a vision impairment. I've got cerebral palsy. There's athletes with arm amputees, leg amputations. Like, we've got a whole broad brush of just different classifications of swimmers. So how do you then, in front of that diverse group of athletes and what they all can individually do and what they need and what's going to help them to prepare for the session, go and deliver something which hits the mark across the board? And that was me and my element. I just love that sort of stuff. So you also, with Paralympic sport, get extremely good at understanding how we can train with injury to a point, or with a system which is not fully as you would have in an able-bodied population. So, for example, we've got an arm amputee. So we've got one full working arm, and then we've got one arm amputated at the elbow. That shoulder is now going to have a significantly different level of load going through it. It's going to be able to do different stuff from a strength training development perspective. So for a long time in Paralympic sport, I was kind of going, what are we doing here? Where's this value in wider things? Are we just very niche? Is it just Paralympic sport? Is that what we're good at? But now stepping out into a bigger world of working with people on their shoulders of all different types of backgrounds and able-bodied people, I'm really good at understanding how to get to the root cause of what's going on from a systems perspective, from a movement first perspective, and then putting together strategies of all different types of variations of exercises based on what people can do, can't do, because we're constantly in a Paralympic environment working around different potential problems or barriers, which makes it difficult to just go, here's one standard program for 10 people, off you go. Mm-hmm. So that problem-solving nature is something that was 100% crafted in Paralympic sport. And what we do now really well with the shoulder is in one session, we can just really quickly get down to what matters and come up with a solution which is going to move people to a better place. So I'm really thankful for that time that I spent there.
That's really cool. Yeah, so thinking outside the box, and you've got to work with the individual in front of you, I guess, with parathletes. But so you've got to do the same thing with able-bodied people. Just because they're all able-bodied doesn't mean they're not individuals with different needs. I mean, we've got some. I know you're working with Charlotte Henshaw, who was somebody who I believe you managed to help incredibly, with a PB and stuff. What was some of the ideas or secrets you had with that which made it all possible?
Yeah, Charlotte was a really interesting one. So she's actually now in para canoe. She's gone on to be extremely successful, double gold medalist in the last games, I think, with para canoe. She's really found her sport, and she so deserved it because she didn't have an easy time in swimming. It's probably fair to say. So Charlotte is 100 meter. When she was swimming, she was 100 meter breaststroker in an S6 classification. So if you think about Charlotte breaststroking, she is literally just arms for 100 meters. So we tried, for the first season or two, we tried a pretty standard strength and conditioning approach, linear periodization. We kind of go through we tick all the phases off, and she was going into the majors, like our June to sort of August, September major competition period after trials. And it just wasn't kind of hitting the performances that we thought she was capable of. And she hadn't PB'd for years at this stage. So we sat down the following season and I said to her, Charlotte, when do you feel the best in the water? And she said September to December. And that was typically when we would do our lower load, higher volume type work. We build the chassis up around that time of year so that we can then go and do more strength work post January into trials, more kind of speed power work as you would normally do in strength and conditioning. So that would normally look like we might be going 16, 18, 20 repetitions, 1 kilos, Ys, Ts, Ws, As, scap focus kind of strengthening work, cuff strengthening work. And we just hammered the shoulder from a volume and strength endurance perspective. And this is relatively non-textbook savvy or non-textbook agreeable in many strength and conditioning circles, because I've been in a workshop with strength and conditioning coaches before where they've said, if you're doing more than 12 reps, then you don't know what you're doing. And I was like, well, I think that's not always the case. So I'm kind of like up at the upper thresholds of doing stuff which hadn't really probably been tried before. But we just decided that if for Charlotte particularly, the performance limitation that we identified was as soon as she's coming in that back 50, so she's coming back after funding the first length, that last 25 meters, as soon as that elbow drops because the shoulder runs out of or fatigues, then she loses that catch position. If she loses a catch position, she starts slipping the water. So she's therefore losing a lot of stroke efficiency. So we were like, if we can keep your elbows higher for longer, we're going to continue to maintain better swimming technique for the back end of the race. She broke a PB that year three times in about 3 months, having not PB'd for about 3 or 4 years prior to it. And I'm not saying that was all what we did, but it was definitely a strategy where we were like, what we are currently doing is not working. So let's try something different, and it paid off for her big time.
Fantastic, great example. Right, so we've got some questions here. Let's get into shoulders. Yes, we've got some questions here. If you have joined us live, you're here to ask questions, people. That's hopefully the best thing we can do for you. So feel free to put something in here. Nikki Mansfield has got a question here. Really happy to hear you reference the entire kinetic chain. Do you integrate whole body movements in a rehab plan right from the start, or stack them in after a period, focusing locally first?
That's a great question. Yes, kinetic chain first. So the first assessment that we will do, we'll look at people's squat and single leg squat patterns. So we start big and then we'll dial in from there. Ultimately, the reason for doing that from an assessment perspective is I want to just see how the whole thing moves. Like what's going on, like what's the movement quality like, what's competency like. Things like a single leg squat for us are really important because it will highlight whether we've got any potential lower limb issues, which could be causing a problem for the shoulder in a sense of if we have, let's say, some control or balance stability position issues around pelvis, knee, ankle, we may not have a stable base for the shoulder to work on top of. So we can go locally to the shoulder directly if we wanted to, but what we'll probably find is when you put somebody back into an environment, if they are involved in the whole body sport, throwing, striking, CrossFit, whatever it might be, if that lower body isn't dealt with, that shoulder is just going to break down again, which is often why you'll see people find themselves in this repetitive injury cycle. And a good example of that would be in a weightlifter that we worked with. So getting shoulder pain, loves to snatch, he's in CrossFit. When we screened him, his single leg squat was pretty shaky, pretty disastrous. So you look at it and go, well, if you can't generate and stabilize force on a single leg, when you're trying to pull that bar off the ground, we probably haven't got particularly good force generation in the snatch pattern. So therefore, as we're bringing the bar up, we're going to have to work super hard from the shoulder to compensate for the lack of force generation from the lower body. So that shoulder's having a horrible time just hiking that bar through that transition phase to get it into a snatch shape. So I'm not surprised you've got some subacromial type pain. So the first thing we get him to do is go back and we're going to go and dial in and focus on building out lower limb single leg exercises. So box step ups or single leg squat type patterns, whatever it might be. And it turns out he's horrible at them, like, and he hates them. And that's probably a pretty good indicator that he should be doing more of them. So we'll have that in the program, but we'll also work locally. I think the way that we work is more in line with the strength and conditioning type of approach rather than the 3 exercises that you'll often get from a physiotherapist. Now, people say that you should only ever give 3 exercises because that's all people can do. I'm like, but I work with athletic people. They're used to spending 60 to 90 minutes in the gym 3 to 5 or 6 times a week. They can handle and they need and want more than 3 exercises.
Mhm.
So where I have a program to play with, I'll stack the deck on all of that. So we'll have some mobility, some control, which will be focused on the local musculature around the shoulder, cuff strength, and whatever it might be. We'll integrate that with something which is going to bring that whole chain together. So something which is very kinetic chain focused, which could be ground-based movement. It could be a single leg squat with a row. It could be a box step up to press, something where I'm working the whole chain together. And then the back end of the program will be more just kind of standard meat and veg strength work. So we'll go push, pull, pressing kind of patterns just to go and build that strength in different ways to complement what we've tried to achieve further up the program, or to ingrain what we've tried to focus on further up the program.
Excellent. Great example. And I guess what you were talking about with the weightlifter, that could apply with the whole kinetic chain, even if it's a sports person and they're kind of playing rugby or having to stop suddenly and then throw or catch or lower or move up a body. It's the same analogy, isn't it? They're going to have to be secure in their lower half if you're hoping to rehab the top half and make those same sort of checks.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I can't not deal with the whole kinetic chain. If I see something, sometimes I'm screening somebody, depending on how much time we've got to work with somebody, the initial question is it impacting the shoulder? So because you could always find something which you could improve in somebody's squat or lunge pattern or hinge pattern. There's always something you can do. But the question is, like, is it significant right now in terms of getting the shoulder to a better place? But I want to make sure that I've cleared that before I just assume that it's going to be a cuff problem, because you can just go and bang away on a cuff and find that you've missed one of the big, like, low-hanging fruits of actually getting that person a long-term outcome.
It's very interesting because I love when it happens. One of the joys of my work, obviously I choose my guests because they're people I admire, like yourself, and I've read your work, and I just, some people say I should have guests that I don't like much on, but it'd just be a rubbish hour. I wouldn't be interested to challenge my biases. But I love how, for example, last week we had James Earls, who was talking about how the traditional method of learning anatomy is kind of looking at just the knee that hurts and going to massive details about all the structure and everything around it. And he says that it just doesn't make sense because it needs to be the other way around. Let's look at movement first of all. Let's look at just how someone's standing, moving up, and then the effect of that on the knee, and then we can understand what's going on at a smaller detail to provide that movement. And that kind of, I think, is why, like as you've been saying, sometimes we do just focus on the rotator cuff and that area there, and we try and rehab that, but we haven't taken into consideration that what the pelvis is doing, what the knee is doing, what the contralateral leg is doing will depend on whether that muscle is going into internal or external rotation, whatever it is. Everything can change depending on what the kinetic chain is doing, so it all ties together. It's very interesting. More questions, people, if you want. Otherwise, I'm going to continue with my ones, and you don't want that, honestly. So great question, Nikki. Let's have other people in there asking questions. And incidentally, if you are listening to the podcast and you've got some questions as well, then I do recommend you go along to YouTube and write your question in there. I promise you, I'm a sad little nerd, and I will go to YouTube to check. And if there is any question in there, I will be there within a flash. I'll do what I'm doing because I like the conversation to continue. So yeah, use YouTube if you've got a question about anything we're talking about. And I promise you, I will get back to you. I'm not that little, I'm 6'6", but I'm a sad nerd. Okay, I do want to give you the wrong idea. Right, and what you've been saying there, I mean, you mentioned, for example, stacking the deck. That's exactly like you said, what you can be talking about in Theatre B on day one at 1:20 p.m. Shoulder Reconditioning, how to stack the deck and get game-changing results. I wanted to ask you also about one of the ways of knowing how the rest of the kinetic chain is involved in a sport is having played that sport yourself. It gives you, I mean, you can learn it, but it kind of helps if you've played that sport because you know, oh, that's happening down there and you're going to have this happening and you understand. Is that really quite important when it comes to helping somebody to have experienced the sport they're doing, as well, I suppose, as the rehab which you're going to give them?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think in the first 5 years of my career, I spent working in university at Trent University. And as part of that, I ran the performance squad, strength and conditioning programs, and also worked on the TAS program. Now with TAS at university, I mean, I had wakeboarders, golfers, horse riders, like any sport you can imagine. I think in the first 5 years, I'd done over 30 different sports because it was just such a melting pot of different athletes. Which for me was at the beginning of my career was amazing because it very much takes you down, and like I said before, it's a movement first approach. So if I understand movement, then I can pretty much, I understand functional anatomy, I can pretty much program for anybody based on the understanding of what are the key positions and patterns that you need to be able to move in and out of. And then where are the potential strength opportunities or the force generation opportunities, or how can we prepare you best for that sport? So I could never have played all of those sports, but what I do think is important is that people are moving in a way where they understand their own body. They've got a good level of kinesthetic awareness. They actually practice to a point some level of functional or some kind of like training based methodology which has a focus on movement. Or you're trying different things. My training, I'm not particularly good at anything. Calisthenics was probably the one thing that I spent the most amount of time, apart from rugby, trying to get decent at, and I still wasn't that good at it. Because my programming, my training is always research. Calisthenics was a research project. I wanted to know what it felt like to do it so that I could have more tools to use with the athletes that I coached. So I've done bits of hypertrophy training. I've done bits of maximal strength training. So I have an experience of quite a broad things. I'm very much a generalist if you look at how I train and have done. But that has added a huge amount of options to my programming potential, when I can go, this would be the right thing for you, because I can write a program which is max strength focused because we've done that before. We know what the variables are. So I am always, from a coaching perspective, big on you should be moving. You need to understand movement. You need to know movement personally, because that is the biggest and the best tool that I've probably ever had of being able to actually get buy-in with athletes and communicate what I want them to do, and understand when I sit down to write a training program, what is it going to feel like to do that session? Because I think it's very easy to put down a fitness session that you're never going to do. I kind of set out early days in my career that I would never write a session that I wasn't prepared to do myself. And not that I would be able to do it to the level of the athletes that I was coaching, but I'd do the session because it's very easy for a coach to go, I'm going to put a session on the board that'll make you sick. Like, anybody can make you sick. It's not hard to get someone to puke if you get them to run long enough. But what's the physical adaptation? Would you do that session, and would you be prepared to actually understand what it is that you're asking other people to do? So maybe I'm old school with that, but that's the way that I still think it's important to have some context around what it is that we're delivering.
I think that's really good advice. And like you said, it doesn't mean you've got to do what you're going to give them, but with suitable regression and progression, which should be there anyway. If you're giving somebody an exercise, you can at least go through it and see if you can do it with less load or less power or force, whatever it is. So that's really important takeaway for therapists out there, I think, and not just learn it from a book. You've got courses and you're very interested in that and trying to provide that information for people. What kind of recommendations would you give for people who do want to understand a little bit more what their clients are going through? If not everybody who looks after CrossFitter can sign up with a gym and do CrossFit, it just might not be their personality. So what other things could they get hold of?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much opportunity these days. I mean, if people are training in the gym regularly, I mean, I know some people, gym's not their thing, but I'll come at this from my bias, as you mentioned before, around my background is strength and conditioning. So strength is always for me going to be part of the solution. And I'm yet to, even if you talk in therapy circles, we are now more so in physical therapy coming into a place of exercise first, and strength training is going to be part of that. And you've seen this shift in the industry of therapists now starting to invest, or the opportunities, like people like 𝐒𝐫𝐻, who are doing great work in strength and conditioning for physiotherapists and rehab professionals. The industry is realizing that actually where the standard education stops isn't actually enough to take people, the client, this is, or the patient, to where they actually need to be if they are an active person or for whatever they want to do in their life. So I think the opportunity then to kind of to go to a gym and go, do you know what, what's CrossFit like? I've never done CrossFit before. What is an EMOM? Well, you can go and find those on the internet. You can find a beginner's based EMOM, and you could just go and put a clock on, and you can just go and give it a go. And you might hate it, but at least you now know when somebody comes in and goes, oh yeah, I flipping love doing EMOMs. You go, okay, I know what an EMOM is, done one. You don't have to go, what? Which is a little bit awkward if you're trying to build that buy-in and rapport with the client and get them to trust you, which is an important part of getting like good outcomes. So I think having some exposure, some willingness to go and try new things and to suck at it is good. And then I think from our side, if people are looking to kind of improve their ability to be able to provide rehabilitation advice for, or exercise prescription for for their clients is to, I mean, you can get programs, and we have programs that people can buy and view it through the lens of, I am just a participant doing this program. What does it feel like to do this program? Back to my earlier point of just try the thing to learn about the exercise and what you're doing. You can see the program and how it's structured, but you can also then take those exercises and go, I really got that great. That one felt great. This exercise would be perfect for X client that I see that has got this shoulder problem. And now I understand that a little bit better and how to help that person. So I think there's so much education out there. I think with social media, there is so much conflicting advice. It's confusing. It's sound bites and all the time. People are not getting the depth. Like trying to learn from social media and use that as your primary education source is a disaster. But I think I also very much recognize that knowledge that we've probably all got courses that we bought in 2021 that we haven't finished yet because learning online on demand is difficult to find the time to do it. So pick some other way. And if you train 5 or 6 days a week or 3 times a week, then that's a great opportunity every time you go in the gym or go and train to learn something which you can implement with your clientele.
Excellent. You mentioned you got some courses which allow people to kind of see what you do and what the people you're training do. Is this available on the website? Let me just bring up
yeah, it is.
Bring this up. So we're talking now about the website, dynamicshoulders.com. There's a load of information on there, but if people go there, what should they check out first on there?
Yeah, so it's an overview of what we do. We're very much in that delivery space to clients or people that we're working with that have got shoulder pain. If you were to click on services, we do have an education course, which we designed. I created that for personal trainers, strength and conditioning coaches, people basically not necessarily coming at this from a physiotherapy background where they may have already had a level of education. However, having said that, there is the level of education in basic undergraduate physiotherapy courses around the shoulder is probably not particularly extensive, but it depends on what you want to do in that rehab space with the shoulder where on that spectrum do you want to work, early stage rehab or where we are, which is more like in that later stages onwards. So there's a course there for people that are interested in learning more about the shoulder if you're coming at it from a personal trainer, strength and conditioning, sports therapist type perspective. The training programs that we have on there are also, we just released our functional fitness program, which is targeted specifically towards a CrossFit audience, but to be honest, it would work for 80% of most sports because it's basic general foundational conditioning for the shoulder. So if you were looking for something where you could actually experience a training program and see how we put it together, then that would be a great place to start.
Amazing. So there you go, people. Check out dynamicshoulders.com. And also, while we're on the topic of kind of places to learn, your Instagram feed is really cool. You do an awful lot of work, don't you? You're putting out a lot of valuable reels. You must spend a lot of time doing that. Is it kind of, without giving too much of it away, are the snips from actual courses, or are you just lining up and doing? Yeah.
Well, to be honest, no, we actually, they were shot live. So Instagram is a challenge in terms of creating content. So that was a workshop which we shot, a live workshop which Karen filmed. So that was 6 hours of delivery. So there's quite a few sound bites in there.
No, it looks like it, because sometimes you see people producing these reels, you're thinking, that's not part of a course. That was just like 20 seconds. It's like watching Mike Tyson training for a Jake Paul fight and then realizing he can't box at all now, obviously. People going, but he was so good in his training. It's like, yeah, for those 6 seconds, embarrassing. But anyway, I won't go down that rabbit hole. But that's why I think your Instagram, the material you put out there looks so real, because you can see that you are actually delivering and you're showing and you're demonstrating. It's not just a little 15-second, sprint and saying that this is how I run a marathon with this running form. No, good stuff. So people should definitely go to Instagram and watch you there.
If there's people out there that are listening to this that are working and they're looking to try and scale their social media, speaking to camera and delivering that way is tough, and it takes a while. I mean, we did it all the way with calisthenics. We were a content machine with calisthenics. We put out so much content. But if you're delivering something, you have an opportunity. If you can just find an opportunity to just be in your natural environment and record it, depending on how you work and where you kind of, if you get obviously permissions of people that are involved and whatever. But you'll do your best work when you're just kind of waxing lyrical and in the flow, rather than when you feel like you're pressured. And then you can just grab little sound bites from that. It's a really easy way to get lots of content.
Great stuff. Right, time is ticking on. People, obviously, like I say, if you've got any questions, then put them in the comments section. I wanted to talk a little bit about chaos, because I've watched a lot of your material, and I've read and listened to other podcasts, and you mentioned the word quite a lot. And last year, that was the buzzword for me of looking at other specialists like Andrew McCauley, who's going to be back this year, and Andrew Jackson. I don't think she's coming this year, but there was quite a few people who were talking about chaos. It was being suggested that that could be one of the missing links as to why previous injury is such a good kind of precursor of re-injury, because a lot of the time we're not involving this chaos in a rehab. What is that to you? What does it mean for people who aren't familiar with this term chaos? What is it, and how do you introduce it in shoulder rehab?
I love this topic. I think this kind of came a while back around. The original part of the philosophy was prepare for chaos, and then you'll be all right, hopefully, or you'll be better than you were if you're not prepared for chaos. And let's take this through a rugby lens, right? Because you can't control what happens on the pitch. You can't control where the ball is. You can't control the tackle contact situation that well. You can't control the ruck. If you go in there, you don't know if you're going to get cleaned out. You're jackling for the ball. You have to reach over a player, put your shoulder in a relatively exposed position to be able to do that. But oftentimes what we would prepare for those kind of sports in a strength and conditioning environment would be the bench press, a bent over row, some pull-ups and a shoulder press. And you're going, well, that's fine if the sport is happening in these kind of sagittal plane positions, but it doesn't. People won't dislocate their shoulder necessarily here. They're more likely to dislocate it when they stick their arm out for a tackle and somebody goes and blows through it, which is what happened to me. So if we've never exposed the brain, the shoulder to different varying positions and patterns and challenges and forced the shoulder to move in different ways under those intensities, then it's no surprise that when we find ourselves in a somewhat chaotic environment, we stick our arm out somewhere or the shoulder gets hit in a certain way, and the brain's like, got no idea what to do with that because I've never been there before. So to make that a bit more of a practical example, we are big on gymnastics rings. So because it allows me to get the shoulder loaded into pretty high intensity work into these wider long lever type positions, I can move the rings, I can move the shoulder, I can load it up, there's lots of different ways to progress it. So when we then find ourselves in a more chaotic environment, whether that's an action sport or a rugby pitch or whatever it might be, CrossFit, we're able to build motor skills, strength, robustness, rate of force development, whatever it might be, in terms of what we're actually getting. There's a number of different phrases I've used there, but in terms of we're getting things which are positively going to prepare us for uncontrollable activities or actions within the sporting context. So I think we kind of can encapsulate that in physical literacy, particularly around the shoulder. You have more degrees of freedom and more movement options than any other joint in the human body. So why would we only train those in such limited ways? It makes no sense. If we were working in a lower body sport, we would have agility type work. We'd be looking to change our direction. We'd be looking at frontal plane type patterns. Yet we don't do that for the shoulder. We stick to very rigid, basic gym exercises or patterns. So preparing for chaos is preparing to the shoulder to move in all the different ways that it can do under appropriate loads based on the demands that you want to place upon it in the sport or the activity that you want to do.
Excellent. And I guess also reacting to unexpected demands. So somehow you've got to incorporate. So how do you recreate? I mean, eventually, I suppose that's why the sport becomes part of rehab. You gently ease somebody into sport rather than just saying, right, go and play, 2 halves, you're going to be fine. But before you are actually, or maybe at the same time you are allowing them to play half a match or something, how do you recreate that in the gym setting, that kind of chaos? Give me a couple, not all of it, save some for therapy expert, but what are some of the exercises which you think our listeners might not think of, which can create that necessary chaos?
Yeah, and this is, you take strength and conditioning principles around how we might train agility. So agility would go from relatively programmed patterns where I'm going to go and run a line, I'm going to go and run, change direction, I'm going to cut right to a red cone, whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden that progresses to somebody giving you a call of whether you're going to go left or right. So now you're having to respond. Or we're going to go and show them a color because it's a visual thing. I'm going to step a certain way or whatever it is. So you're now reacting and responding to a different environment. The same thing could happen at the top end in the shoulder type approach. You could put somebody into a situation where they've got a TheraBand, for example, we're loading the shoulder up, so the band's behind or attached to a rig behind me, and somebody's going to signal whether they want me to go into a Y, a T, or an A position. Now I'm going to have to go and watch that, and I have to go and throw my shoulder out based on a stimulus, for example, or whatever it might be. That band is then going to be loaded, which is going to pull my shoulder backwards, and I'm going to have to dynamically stabilize that quite quickly in order to be able to hold that shape. So there's a number of different ways that we can do it, but that's kind of like at the sharp end in terms of the coaching or the coach interaction within that. The ground-based level for us is just can we start to build plyometric strength around the shoulder? Can we start to kind of get the shoulder moving more explosively, plyometric push-up type progressions? And we might start just in quite close, just normal patterns. We might then actually start to go plyometric push-up, and the job is then to go and catch wide and stabilize. So when I go back onto a rugby pitch, rather than being good here in a plyometric position, I actually can create force. I can push off, I can stick my arm out, and I can create quite high levels of stability or control. And think about what we talked about right at the top of the show. That's massively integrated with the kinetic chain, because I'm now having to stabilize in that push-up position and control and create tension through the rest of the system so I can hold that shape. It's a very different transfer into the sports environment of a chaotic environment, as opposed to lying on a bench press supported by the bench on the ground and just pushing a bar up and down, where that's actually arguably not that transferable. In some ways, that's probably a very loaded term for some strength and conditioning coaches and sports people around transfer of training. But let's say there's a role for both of those things in terms of preparation for sporting environment.
That's great. Yeah, two classic examples. So you've got the reactive thing of you indicating when and what direction that athlete's going to move. So you mentioned, for example, with the TheraBand, rather than just doing sets of 10 under their control and in their own time. And then you've got, the plyometric stuff. And essentially what we're talking about as well is kind of playing. I mean, this is why kids grow up so strong normally, if everything's going right, because they're doing that automatic, responding to each other, and ducking and diving and pushing and playing.
Yeah.
And I guess that's something I think I've heard you talk about as well, is make activities as close to fun or like a sport as you can, rather than just the stagnant bicep curl in a mirror.
Yeah, 100%. We there's two things in this one. Play is massive. Play is there was a period, I don't know when it was, but when did exercise become so dull? We put people in an indoor box and we put static machines there, and we said, this is, you move this weight from that position, you go backwards and forwards, and we're going to do that 10 times. I think it's funny when you look back, you see some of the videos from, particularly like America does this quite well. They go, what does like physical education look like in the 60s? Well, there's some, I won't go down the rabbit hole of why education looked like that in the 60s, but you see people climbing ropes and swinging on rings and doing like stuff which actually made them quite good at moving. Whereas now our training and exercise can look like we sit down in the gym and we like,
Nautilus.
We don't move. So I think getting back to this idea of play, it's so good for the brain. We get to utilize the most wonderful thing that we have probably in this whole kind of conversation, which is neuroplasticity and the ability to learn to move in new ways. It's a game changer from a physical literacy perspective. It's shown to be positive from a brain health perspective. Like, there are so many benefits of just having play or learning a new skill, like a handstand or whatever it might be. And the other conversation to have around this is, I have a 7-year-old little boy called Jack, who I'm smiling because we have a gym in our conservatory. So he comes down, we train early in the morning. So Jack will come down in his pajamas, and he's been doing this now for about 2 years. Jack can do plyometric push-ups, not because I've taught him or because I've told him to do them, but he sees me doing them. So he'll come in now. I'm not even doing them in the gym in the morning, and he'll come down. He gets his weight plates out to jump up onto, and he'll sit and he'll just do 20 plyometric push-ups, up, down, up, down, up, down. I'm like, it's play. I'm not going to tell him to stop. And if anybody kind of comes up and goes, oh, kids shouldn't be doing these sorts of things, like, kids do stuff like jump off boxes and walls and stuff under way more forces through the system than we ever need to worry about in a sensible, just playing around and being in and around in a gym environment under my observation and control. But I just think to him, it's not training, it's not exercise, it's just, this looks fun. Can I do that? I want to see if I can do that thing. And it's so beautiful to see, but it gets drained from us as we go from childhood to adulthood. And if you look at what is a big part of how we recondition shoulders, well, can you hang? Can you swing? Can you rotate? It's play. the brain is task focused. So if we can create an environment in which we challenge the brain to move in new ways, give it a job to do, you will get way more out of your performance progression, as opposed to if the brain is bored, sat on a bench just pushing weights. From an actual kind of usefulness or development as a human, to be able to do things with your body. You can tell the passion's coming out in that answer.
No, it's great. I really, it's funny because you hear yourself explaining it, and it makes so much sense. We're returning somebody to be able to play their sport. So why is our rehab not playing as well? Why are we making them do these? There may be a place for like isolated exercises, especially in the beginning stage, maybe depending on the individual, but eventually you've got to start playing. And amazing. Yeah. I'm really interested in you. Do you know, you probably don't know John Scriven from Jersey, from Move Well?
I know the name.
Yeah, you guys, I mean, we've had on the show before on episode 177, and he was talking about physical literacy, real geek. I mean, if you two get together, you're either going to just explode because you're not allowed to be in the same kind of force field together.
Yeah, like magnets.
Exactly. Just going to be or you're going to sit down and miss your presentation somewhere else because you're going to have so much in common. But he's going to be at Therapy Expo this year. And yeah, so much sense coming from both of you, and crossovers of, again, showing how in the 60s what people were doing was actually really cool. And somewhere along the line we lost it all. But yeah, great stuff. Right, look, it's 8:57. Lindsay Penn, I think, has summed up what I think a lot of listeners are thinking. Sounds great. We'll be planning my 2025 CPD in December, so that will be added to the list. There we go. Well done, Lindsay. Good to hear.
We're probably going to run, we don't do a huge amount of coach education. We will probably run one face-to-face coach education program next year. We do them if we get invited in-house to go and do them, but in terms of us hosting one, there'll probably be one next year at some point. So if people are interested in coming to a live experience where we actually kind of get to go in the gym and we'll do the whole kind of thing face-to-face, the best way to do that is get us on social media. On our main channels, Instagram, so at Dynamic Shoulders, and subscribe to the email newsletter, which will communicate all of these kind of course opportunities out. So that would be the big kind of things. If you want to stay in touch with what we're doing, then come and find us and stay connected. And
sounds exciting. What part of the country are you in? Where are you? I forget.
Well, we live in Nottingham, but we generally get all over the place at the moment, to be honest. I'll probably hear about 50% of the week. So we spend quite a lot of time in London these days as well.
Wonderful. Right. So there we go, people. Now, we've been talking about Tim's involvement with Paralympic athletes and with people with missing limbs and so on, which has reminded me, and I just want to announce this now before you finish the podcast. I'm really thrilled to announce that one of my guests from episode 200, it's going back now, I can't remember what it was, but some of you will remember we had Richard Dickie Davis and Rich Potter, who were two Army veterans, both single leg amputees, and they recently returned from their limitless expedition snowman trek in Bhutan. Let me just bring this up on the screen for those of you who like the visuals, which I know there are some of you in here who come here for that very reason. So yeah, they recently came back. Rich Davis had to actually come back a little bit early because, I mean, tragically, and he'll be talking about this at Therapy Expo, which is what I'm building up to. He's coming along here to cut short. Towards the end, we had to cut short just because literally his stump just couldn't deal with it anymore. It was a physical thing. Mentally, he could have gone and finished it, but basically the prosthetic and the stump were not getting on, considering that they were doing one of the most world famous difficult treks in the Himalayas in Bhutan. But I'm thrilled to say that Richard Dickie Davis is going to be with us at Therapy Expo next Wednesday on day one at 1:30 p.m. We really didn't have space in the STA theatre, but fortunately a gap has appeared in the Hands-On Hub, which is right next to the STA stand. So Rich is going to be there at 1:30 p.m. on day one to talk about soft tissue therapy, about his limitless expedition. And also he's going to be joined by Carla Bickerstaff, who is an STA member, has been on the show before as well. And they're going to talk about soft tissue therapy for amputees. And they're going to demonstrate some of the manual therapy and massage that can be used with amputees, and hopefully kind of get rid of some of the taboos and the misinformation and the kind of just general fear which we have when somebody doesn't look quite like us, including missing limbs. Word has it, and I'm knowing Rich as I have and met him, a stump will be produced and you'll be able to get your hands on it, which I think is just a beautiful thing to be able to do. There's often people think, is it going to be hard? Is it going to be soft? Is it going to hurt? And things like, how do you get somebody who's missing a leg to actually do a quad stretch if they're a lower limb amputee? you've got no ankle to hold on to. There's nothing there. So what do you do? How do you help them? And that sort of stuff. So there's so many questions which probably people and therapists will have that might avoid you from working with somebody who is missing a limb, or maybe prevent you from actually entertaining the thoughts. So it's going to be a hugely informative and wonderful people to work with as well, to listen to. So come along if you are free on day one at 1:30 p.m. For soft tissue therapy for amputees with the fantastic Rich Dickey Davis. Another reason to come to Therapy Expo. So there we go. Right. That's it. Thanks, Tim. Second time I'm saying this for such an informative
do you think it was better than the first one or not? I'm not sure.
You know what? Both. I am inspired and impressed and man crushed even more than I was before. Because I just love the stuff that comes out of your mouth. It's so good and so useful to our listeners and therapists. So I can't wait to meet you again. Last time we met, I think which year was it?
About 12 years ago. 20. I remember meeting you. I think it was outside the arena.
It was a long time ago. It was amazing with Richard Whitehead up there, and it was a great time. So it's gonna be great to see you again in person. You haven't changed at all. I'm sure I have, but it's been great to spend some time with you and host you in the STA Theatre.
Looking forward to it.
It'll be great. So that's it, people. Like I say, there won't be a live episode recording next week. Thank you for everybody who did join us live. Brian Huxley, thank you for sharing your comments. Yeah, another enjoyable session. Thanks, Tim and Matt. Thank you, Brian. Thank you guys for coming along. I really appreciate it. And if you listen to the podcast, and thank you as well. The downloads are still regular and happening, and even some months they're just increasing. So I really appreciate it. The one thing you could do if you don't want to be self-centered and purely egotistical is share it. And the best way you can do that is either sharing it on your feed. Oh, check out this episode with Tim Stevenson, the Sports Therapy Association podcast. Just put it out there, because we all do this. Well, the podcast is to get the good word of our guests out there to therapists to improve healthcare and to help the patients out there. Obviously, if you're helping more people, it's going to be a better business for you. You're not in this for the money, therapists. We know that. You would be doing something far different. You don't get much money for helping people these days. You get money for raising money for other people. So we want to help you make money by doing something which is beautiful, which is healthcare, helping others. So help us by leaving a rating for the podcast, for sharing it, for leaving a little comment in there, the same way as you do it when you're buying something on Amazon. Just do it for the podcast and it makes a big difference. I always say it, we get about 2,000 downloads or something since Apple changed their publishing way, and it was 3,000, went down to 2,000 now. And yet we've only got about 37, 38 reviews. So like 1,672 of you, wherever it is, are letting me down. So please don't do that, guys. If you're listening to this, take 2 minutes, 1 minute even, just leave a rating and review. Okay. And if you are coming to Therapy Expo, then be sure to come and say hi to Tim, whether it be in the theatre or at the STA Theatre, and myself. And we'll spend some time together and hang out in probably what is still one of the best therapy kind of conventions and conferences in the world. Wouldn't you agree, Tim?
It's my first time. I'm excited.
Oh, of course, it's true. Yeah. That's gonna be great. It'll be really interesting to hear what you think about it. You're going to meet some great people. Hopefully that's what I love, standing back and seeing, for example, you meeting John Scriven. Have you met Claire before, Claire Minshaw?
Yeah, we know Claire, I know each other. Yeah.
There you go. Common grounds, isn't it? So obviously people like that will be there. Mike James and maybe other people. Angela Jackson, Andrew McCauley.
Yes, I met Angela at Shoulder Rehab Conference a couple of years ago.
So it's going to be great to see you guys hanging out and just chewing the fat together. It's wonderful. Be great. Brilliant. Right. Thanks again, Tim. Really appreciate it. See you next week.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Look after each other, and we'll see each other soon. Bye-bye.